just in case I need it. Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this corporate lunch event. It's lovely to see you all here today. I'd like to start by giving you a bit of background about myself, followed by a brief account of one of our transfers and what's involved. I have 16 years experience working within paediatrics in both the acute and chronic setting, but specialising in haematology, oncology and bone marrow transplant. I spent 10 years at Great Ormond Street Hospital, where I began my nursing career. Then I moved to UCH and subsequently one of the paediatric matrons at the Harley Street Clinic Children's Hospital. Last July, I joined Lucy Air Ambulance for Children. My role here is to develop and oversee the service delivery and the operational aspects of each transfer. I've since coordinated and overseen 12 transfers, and today I'm going to give you a brief account of one of them. Henry and Sophia were born prematurely at 27 weeks, and we needed to transfer them from Cornwall to London for further care and management. Typically, the day began about 6:30 in the morning, where we checked the equipment, prepare the aircraft with a scheduled departure time of 8 a.m. On the slide here, you can see a picture of Henry. He's being prepared for transport. Henry and his sister Sophia, on the day they both weigh just under 900 grams, which is a little less than a bag of sugar. I don't know if you can see, but to the right of the slide there's a 50 ml syringe, which gives you an idea of how tiny Henry was on the day of transfer. There's some tubing at the top, and you can see here that he's receiving some respiratory support, in this case CPAP, which is continuous positive airway pressure. It's policy that we always, the children always kneel by mouth during the flight because they're on ventilatory support, and they'll have some intravenous fluids running to keep them, to prevent them from becoming hypoglycemic. So there's normally 10% dextrose that we would run during the infusion. So to have a couple of central lines to run any drugs are also necessary. So they're the three main points that we need to look for in travelling with a child this size. Keeping them warm, so they'll be in an incubator, keeping them kneel by mouth, giving them ventilatory support, and keeping their glucose levels up. On top of this, the flight nurse completes a very comprehensive checklist prior to leaving the hospital. This takes about an hour to do, but it can be longer if the child needs to stabilise, so it depends what happens on the day. The next slide is Henry. You can see he's much more organised, and he's ready to leave the hospital, leave the unit, and start his journey. Some of you may see there's some bubble wrap underneath the blanket, which is used for extra insulation, and it prevents the temperature changes being quite so acute. The next part of his journey is in a road ambulance, and it was 20 minutes to the airport. So this little one's first flight was from Truro to Biggin Hill, which is just south of London. Inside the aircraft, you can see Henry in the incubator. Last year, Lucy Ambulance purchased this vital piece of equipment, which cost in the region of £100,000. Travel incubators are specifically designed to minimise the heat loss and provide the optimal thermal management and setting to support growth and survival. So in other words, they mimic the natural antenatal environment. We use the incubator for any child weighing less than 2 kilograms. And the last few months, we've used this for 92% of our transfers. So it was a good purchase. Due to the space and the current configuration inside the aircraft, we can only actually accommodate one incubator at a time. So we had to fly Henry and Sophia separately. So that actually made for 5 legs to the mission, compared to the usual 2 or 3, which would be normal for just the one child. For our transfers, we work closely with Capital Air Ambulance. They're the largest ambulance provider in the UK, and I'd like to welcome Lisa Humphreys, who's here with us today from Capital. It's lovely to see you, Lisa. Thank you. So the planes we use are called King Air 200s, and they're one of the most spacious and comfortable air ambulances for patient and crew, and they operate about 28,000 feet. Inside the main body of the aircraft, The fuselage is about 4'4" by 4'8". So it's not huge, but it comfortably accommodates 2 or 3 medical crew, all the equipment necessary, and a parent. One of the main advantages in using fixed-wing aircraft has to be the ability to manage the internal cabin pressure. So this compensates for the atmospheric changes at altitude and makes it much safer and comfortable for our patients. And fixed-wing aircraft are also much less noisy, less vibration, better temperature control, and they're not so dependent on weather conditions. And with the exception of 1 or 2 helicopters, I think I might have some aviation people in the audience. With the exception of 1 or 2, they can fly at much longer range. So with Henry and Sophia, it took 15 hours to complete the mission to get them both back into London. But the actual flight time was only 55 minutes with a 20-minute ambulance journey each side. So it massively reduces the time it takes to transfer these children. This is me looking a bit bedraggled. That's back at the unit at 9:30 that night. We arrived back into St Mary's neonatal intensive care unit in Paddington. And this is the parents of the twins. It was a very special moment and one that I should never forget. Nearly 4 months later, the twins were both well enough to be discharged home. So they were quite poorly and need a lot of intervention and management of their care. Part of my role is to support the family throughout the entire process in both a practical and holistic sense, which is a very rewarding part of my job. Although we live in a society where healthcare is easily accessible within the NHS, there still remain situations where the gaps in certain specialist services remain. Air transfer for children is one of them. However, there are still no dedicated ring-fence funds set aside in the NHS, so the service relies purely on charitable resources to operate. As I'm sure you're all aware, in the current financial climate in the NHS, this situation is likely to remain unchanged, with health services being stretched further and further and specialist units becoming geographically further apart. We are very pleased, however, that we are now being recognised for our role within neonatal air transport, and I'm working hard to develop a similar thing within paediatrics. As a paediatric nurse, it's a privilege to be able to provide this service and be part of such a special and much needed charity. To finish, I would just like to leave you with a quote from one of the families who we have recently been involved with. But thank you for listening. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them later this afternoon. But in the meantime, please enjoy your lunch. Thank you.